Award-winning author Marjorie Hudson's new book is called Accidental Birds of the Carolinas. And it's set in a fictional North Carolina county where the locals and the accidental newcomers come in contact with each other and mingle. We'll learn how these now North Carolina characters make for some wonderful stories. We'll learn that from the author, Marjorie Hudson, on North Carolina Bookwatch next.
Funding for North Carolina Bookwatch is made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNC-TV, and by the North Carolina Humanities Council.
Welcome to North Carolina Bookwatch. I'm D.G. Martin. My guest is Marjorie Hudson, the author of Accidental Birds of the Carolinas, and it's got a subtitle, Stories About Newcomers and Natives and the Healing Power of the Rural South.
Yes.
It's a book of short stories.
It is. It's fiction stories about all these people who are imagined, but based on people that I got to know as a newcomer in the South over the last 25, 30 years.
Well, you've set these are, books of short stories are handled differently. Most of your stories, maybe all of them, are set in Ambler County, North Carolina,
That's right.
which is not unlike any North Carolina county near rural but near urban centers where the urban areas are moving in. Maybe Chatham County, where you live, may be inspired by other counties.
That's right.
Well, you know that I identified with one of your stories, maybe more than the others, and I'd love for you to talk about it. And this is about an old retired, now a young retired, young, relatively young, but retired Army officer who is worried about his heart. And he's living not in the typical rural area that you think of, but in one of these rural areas that has been captured by either a retirement community or a gated subdivision.
Yes.
Will you tell us about this story and where it came from?
Well, it's really one of those gifts that a writer gets. I was walking my dog about 20 years ago, and I saw a man with military bearing running on the road, coming my direction, and as he passed, he looked at me and he gave me such a look of utter desperation that I was just heartbroken, and I didn't stop. He didn't stop. He just kept going, and so this person really haunted me. I would never meet him. I didn't know who he was. I didn't want to intrude on his life. But the way fiction haunts us, he started to haunt me, and I knew right away I wanted to write about him. And I just started to make up a story about why he was running, why he was feeling the way he was, and what his life was really like.
And well, tell us about the character that you created, because I identify with this character a lot.
Yeah.
And I'm just to set it off, he's running. He shouldn't be running because his heart's had a problem, but he's determined to stay in shape until he dies, and he wants to die. He doesn't want to die like maybe his friend is dying.
Because by God, if a man can't run, what good is he? So he has this strong, sort of ethic of keeping fit. But he's found out, this character, Randall Jefferson Lee, the colonel, has found out that he has a really terrible heart condition, and that it is not something that can be fixed. And he is going to have to do very expensive PT or something. And he decides not to worry his wife about it, not to teach her how to use the defib, but instead to engage in his own physical therapy program, during which he will either get better or will die. And he does not want to end up being somebody who is lying on the living room floor face down in a pile carpet, which has happened to him before. And the EMTs come and bring him back, and he ends up living as a vegetable. He has a terrible fear of the medical profession kind of fixing him and just leaving him to die a slow death. This happened to his best friend, and he's really
Now I want you to tell us just what happened. We're not going to do the whole story, but what happens next? That's a surprise.
Oh, DG, what happens next? He comes back from a long run, and considering all the things that are wrong with his life and kind of complaining about them in his head, and he comes to the front stoop of his house, and his neighbor is sitting there, and his neighbor looks up, and his neighbor is crying, and his neighbor reaches out and he says, "What is it, man? You know, is it your wife?" And the man says, no. Turns out Rand's wife has collapsed suddenly on the tennis court, and they were not able to revive her.
Well, this is just a great story, and it hits me because I think as we progress, we begin to worry more about death, and we worry about our own death, and we don't really take into account what would happen if our partner or our best friend or spouse is the one who goes first. And dealing with that problem. Now, what brings it, this is the title story of your book, Accidental Birds of the Carolinas. How is this a retired military man who winds up in a North Carolina new community that's set in this otherwise rural county? How is he in, what does that have to do with accidental birds?
Well, an accidental bird is a bird that's been blown off course by a great storm, a bird who's migrating, who ends up in a strange place. Often tropical birds end up in North Carolina or in parts of New England, and they're just really not in the right place. A great storm has moved them there. And the characters are birders, and so they know what an accidental bird is, and they encounter one in the course of their life together in this new place, and they see a painted bunting, and they don't know what it is, and they look it up, and they page through the Petersons, and they look at the markings, and they at first think it might be a Carolina parakeet, you know, the extinct bird.
Right.
And the wife, Anne, thinks, that's what it is. And Rand says, no, that's not what it is. They figure out what it is, and so he starts a list, a sort of a sardonic list of the accidental birds of the Carolinas. He starts his own bird list.
Well, I took it, and also he's an accidental bird. He's wound up in North Carolina, sort of, and he's one of these characters of your collection of short stories who are arguably accidental birds, and I don't know, I don't know which one to pick, but what about Providence? There's and how does this accidental bird, who is she and how does she get to North Carolina?
Yeah, Nina and Tyler. Nina is a young woman who's just married a soldier come back from Iraq, and she's married him before he left, and when he came back he was damaged, and things start to go wrong for them very quickly, and she doesn't know what to do. She's been told to stick with the marriage, but she gets quite desperate, and she's afraid for her life. And she starts hearing what she thinks of as the voice of God telling her what to do. It tells her, make spaghetti with meatballs, and then Tyler's a little bit nicer after she makes spaghetti with meatballs. It tells her, where to go in the car. And at some point it tells her, when she's quite desperate, to get up and leave. And indeed she does. She takes the Mustang and she heads south. And the voice kind of tells her which way to turn, and you might think that she's a little crazy, but she seems very sane, following the directions of the voice, and she ends up seeing a sign that says Providence, that place that takes care of us through grace. And she turns there. Turns out it's a Baptist church. But she turns and ends up in a little town on the shores of the Sissipahaw River, which is a fictional river. And she kind of looks around and says, this is the place. And the voice stops talking to her, but she starts talking to herself. And it's all about her encounters
So
with the
this
new.
is how she winds up in North Carolina and in your fictional
That's right.
county and becomes a fixture.
Yeah.
And is this, I mean, are there people like this in your real county
You
who
know,
just kind of wind up this way?
one of the things as a newcomer that I do is I talk to people about how they ended up here. And I've interviewed quite a lot of people about it, sometimes very informally at parties. And some of them do just get up and move. They feel like, you know, I don't know anybody who has a story exactly like hers where they left an abusive relationship. But they do, they're called to come here. There's something that draws them, and it's a little mystical, it's a little mysterious. And what keeps them here, for some people it's very scientific, you know, there are 3 universities in close proximity and hospitals and good rates of return on resale on your home. And for some people it's like, boy, I feel at home here. And I have a little bit of that feeling myself. Her story is not my story, but I moved here after visiting a friend in this area and looking around and just falling in love. In fact, there's a story to that. When I was visiting, it had been raining for 4 days, and we went to look at a farmhouse for rent that she wanted to move to. And as we came to the clearing, the clouds parted and the sun came out and a rainbow formed, I kid you not, over this beautiful white farmhouse.
Wow.
And I took it as a sign.
Well, one of the, another one of your characters, the narrator in the story called Home, is an engaging story for me, even though it doesn't match the things that are happening to me, but things I worry about. And this is a woman who's married to a guy named Carter,
Right.
and living happily on a farm in Ambler County. But Carter's been married before.
Yes.
And how does that make how does that make for a story?
Well, in the story, the young woman is just moving in with her new husband, and she's the boy that is his son from his first marriage is going to come visit. So she needs to prepare for that, and she's pretty nervous about it. And the boy comes, and they have their various encounters, and she begins to love him. But the boy comes and the boy goes, and it's kind of a heartbreaking pattern that many people who have shared custody situations are familiar with, especially with a very young child. And also the ex-wife comes and she goes. And meanwhile, in the background, there are all these encounters with deer crossing the road, deer dancing in the meadow. When I originally wrote the story, my first draft was mostly about, it was kind of a still life painting with deer crossing the road at sunset. And I found out from Max Steele, who critiqued the story for me, he wrote 12 pages on a 12-page story, that really something has to happen in a story. So I made sure something happened.
Well, what you made happen, and this is the haunting part of it, that it never kind of grasped me in terms of the, quite ordinary situation of a new family incorporating parts of the old family and the transitions with custody and visiting and all of these things that complicate the lives for many people. But this young woman goes and finds the pictures of the happy family that had been on the farm before. So this love of place is complicated by a reminder that there were other people who loved this place, and you're sort of in their situation. That it's almost as if we think about the Native American population who preceded us in these lands, and they haunt us.
Oh, yes, and that's in some of the stories, that's very much part of what I'm working towards, is really honoring the hauntedness of the landscape. And so many places you go in rural North Carolina, there will be evidence of the Native American people who lived here who were wiped out in 1711 and so on, in the Yamasee War and the Tuscarora War. And when European settlers came to the central part of North Carolina, they found grinding stones and abandoned villages, and people still find them because the whole population had been wiped out. So there's a sense of something living there before us, and that is just as you say.
Well, that
story
answers a question, or starts to answer a question I had, because one of your stories is set in 1720 or so, with centered around this legendary figure in North Carolina history, John Lawson, who traveled all around and visited these Native American villages. How does this story from 1720 fit in your collection of stories about modern Ambler County and the accidental birds who happen to live here?
It's a little different. It's a little different, but I love this story, and it's kind of, I see it as the centerpiece story because it is about, I think, the roots of North Carolina, or Southern hospitality is among Native people, and also—
Say that again, because that slipped by me. The roots of our hospitality, it comes from it doesn't. It's not from Europe or Africa. It's from from Native American culture.
Many scholars maintain that the Native patterns of welcoming the stranger, which is a lot what the book is about, are the roots of Southern hospitality. You sit down, you feed, you entertain, and you welcome anyone who comes who's a stranger. Now, they may later become an enemy.
Well, that is it did in John Lawson's case.
Yeah.
That's history. What's the story about? And it's called New World Testament.
Yes, New World Testament. It's based on a true story in which John Lawson, English explorer around 1701 through 1709, explored most of North and South Carolina, and one of his Indian guides was Eno and Eno was an Eno Indian, and he loved John Lawson. They just developed an instant appreciation for each other, and John Lawson tried to convert him to Christianity, and Eno said, "No, can't do that, but you may have my son." So I was so moved by that sacrifice. I think—
Have his son in the sense that he can become European,
adopt my son,
and he can
and
be your religion.
Convert,
but I won't go there.
To Christianity, but I won't go there. That's not for me. And I think because Eno was a very wise man, and he saw that things were changing, and that his son might have advantages by being adopted by an English person. So it ended up, I wondered what became of the son, and really there's not a lot of documentation. There is a little bit, but then I sort of thought about their travels together and how much what a great friendship they had.
So presumably they crossed this fictional Sissipahaw River and Ambler County, and were there.
It's a wonderful story in the original.
Well, it's a wonderful story the way you wrote it too.
Thank you.
And in this collection of short fiction, there is a longer piece that is almost long enough to be a novel, but it doesn't quite make a novel. But it's very important, I think, to you in the sense that it's called The Outside World, and you bring a person from the Midwest down as a young person to live in North Carolina, to go to school in North Carolina, and wind up staying. And so I said, this is the closest thing to autobiography that we've got in the story. But tell us about The Outside World. Just tell us what you will, because I'm interested in all kinds of things about it. First of all, why is it so long, and then why is it so short, and what's the point of it? Is it autobiographical? And how do the characters in this book fit in the accidental birds of the Carolinas category?
Yeah, boy. Well, let's see. There's Jolene and John. Jolene is the young woman from the Midwest, and I am originally from the Midwest, so there's something autobiographical in there. And she falls in love with the South. She moves to the South because she gets a scholarship to go to UNC. I myself did not go to UNC, so just to clear that up. But she falls in love with an English professor, with a young grad student English professor, And he introduces her to his dream, which is to restore the family farm out in Ambler County and to live like Walden, you know, like Thoreau on Walden Pond. And she just falls for that hook, line, and sinker. And meanwhile, she's studying Emily Dickinson and trying to write poetry. So I guess you could say there's a little bit of, you know, the poetry writing impulse in Marjorie, just as there is in Jolene.
Well, one of the features of the story that interested me is that as ideal as living on the land might be for a young academics, it's a really hard, it's not an easy easy thing to do. And these people have some troubles.
Yeah, they believe that they are creating kind of a world apart from the world, and the outside world is kind of the enemy. And so when they get into trouble, they don't really have any resources. And I was writing a little bit about kind of the back to the land people who really want to stay apart from the world and have to be very resourceful. And so these two are resourceful, but when they give birth to, Jolene gives birth to a Down syndrome, boy, they don't really know what's going on. And I think John knows what's going on a little bit more than Jolene, and they don't know how to help. And it's only by chance that they end up at a hospital where someone tells them how to take care of the son.
Well, this is a great saga.
Yeah.
And in one sense, it's a saga that calls for expansion in the sense that it's a family, you know, one of these 800-page sagas, and you've condensed it to less than 100 pages, fewer than 100 pages, so that we just wonder how's this family going to turn out?
Well, I'm glad you asked. I'm glad you asked.
Well, did this story cause you trouble? I guess that's the...
Well, I was fascinated with it, and I have to say that I was writing something else about these characters, and I decided to explore their background. And this story started as a study, you know, a sketch of where did these two characters, who I'm writing about later in their lives, where did they come from? How did they connect? You know, how was the child born?
So I'm going to get my novel later.
Yeah, there's one in the works.
All right, well that's good. I mean, we're running out of time, and I want to get to this before we finish, and that is there are religious themes that run through these stories,
yeah, there are.
and puzzling religious themes as people are skeptics, and sometimes they hear the voice of God, and so. What experiences in religion bring you to be able to write about this? Do these reflect your worries about religion? And
oh, what a great question. You know, I realized when I was putting together the collection that there were a lot of kind of strange, mystical, spiritual voices and sort of commentary about Christianity. For example, in Jolene's background, as a child, she gets fascinated by the idea of the angel unawares, and she keeps thinking she sees one, you know, in the field.
But you're laughing.
And I was raised as a Methodist minister's daughter, so I was raised deeply in religion, regular Sunday, and also fascinated by, I guess, my dad's, you know, leadership in that area, and he was an interesting man, and he was a leader in the peace movement, and we ended up moving to Washington, D.C., and I had my own kind of journey. I've had my own journey with organized religion, where I was not a Methodist, and then I became an Episcopalian, and now I'm kind of a sometimes Episcopalian. But I see, you know, the struggles that people have with faith in their lives, and with, you know, being able to take a leap of faith and make a new life, are all kind of connected with this transition in life. You know, when people have transitions in their life, which these characters do, they often end up seeking or looking for some guidance or some kind of help. And so I did not really consciously put that in there, but I realized that that's part of what I think about.
Well, we haven't got time to explore all of it, but in this longer piece, The Outside World, that we've just finished talking about, there's a character who has a spiritual side of the African-American neighbor and midwife who
Yes.
Has a spirituality that isn't exactly Christian, but sort of Christian.
Yeah, she has some Tuscarora background. She does go to church. You don't see that in this story, but so she has a kind of a Christian side to her, but she also has a kind of a hauntedness of the depth of the spirit life of the land is in her.
Well, that's unfortunately we have to stop. Maybe that's a good place to wind up, to talk about the spiritual mix that still is associated with the land and this mythical Ambler County that's nearby everything in North Carolina.
Yeah,
thanks, Marjorie Hudson, for a wonderful book, Accidental Birds of the Carolina, and for taking time to talk to us about it.
Thanks, DG.
And thanks to all y'all for listening. I really appreciate it. And just to remind you that we'll be back here same time next week, and I'd love for you to join us, and I'll introduce you to the work of another one of North Carolina's great writers. See you then.
Funding for North Carolina Bookwatch is made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNC TV, and by the North Carolina Humanities Council.